So this was a really interesting discussion that I had with Stu today. It made me realize that when we're looking at our leadership and performance, there are certain tools that we can have. And Stu just literally just pulled out like 4 or 5 tools out of his bag. And I went, oh my goodness, I could so use that. So I encourage you to listen to this. There's some things that we can use day in, day out. We cover a whole raft of topics from what does it mean? What's imposter syndrome? Understanding how we can influence people, and then also how do we make rest, and how do we ensure that we fulfill all of the parts of our lives. So I encourage you to listen all the way through. Stu is an incredibly interesting speaker, and I learned a lot today. Today's guest is Stu Wright, who is a partner at Giant London. And they're experts in relational intelligence. And we're going to be discussing what is it that stops us from reaching our full potential as leaders. I'm Tony Wood from CEO Collaborative Forum, and let's hear CEO Reflect. Stu, a very, very warm welcome to you.
Hi, Tony, and hi, everyone listening at CEO CF. Great to be on this recording today and looking forward to a great conversation about leadership.
I was really, really happy when we were preparing for this. There was one of the things that we were talking about, how can we make or how can we help leaders reach their full potential? And it's always a tricky subject. So, I mean, maybe let's look at it from the other side is why does underperforming and how does it affect it? What does underperforming affect us in what way?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Tony. And I've deliberately just pulled up here on the screen a little tool that I'd love to share with us because I think it really does answer that question, and then perhaps share a little story to make the point. So, if we might be underperforming in one area of our life and performing well in another area, and the issue is that can still pull down the area that we're performing quite well in eventually. So what this little tool that I've got on the screen shows you is that there are different spheres or circles in which we lead all the time. Now, all of us are having to lead ourselves, and that's really at the center. And really the way we lead in the other circles in our life really depends on how well we're leading ourselves. Because if we're not very intentional about looking after ourselves, about being places on time, about our intellectual learning, our knowledge base, our skills base, then we're going to struggle in all the others anyway. But the next circle out is family, and
Right.
That's going to be different for everybody. That could be somebody who's unmarried, but they've got parents or doesn't have a partner, or it could be someone with a partner. It could be someone with children. We've got people around us, and how are we leading in our families? How are we being an intentional leader there? Our team, that's in our work environment. We're going to be in a team, whether that's a senior team, whether we're a CEO leading a team, or we're in a team in an organization in some way. There's leadership there. Then there's the organization that we're part of. And lastly, the community. And what this says is really that we don't want to be accidental, because when a leader is accidental, they're kind of relying on, well, I hope I'm leading okay. I hope I'm leading okay in my family. And hope's not really a strategy for success. I hope I'm leading my team okay. I hope I'm leading my organization. No, not really good enough. We need to be intentional. Now, it might be, and this is how it relates to my story, and really it's a story of failure, but something that I've learned from Tony, is that it might be you're leading incredibly well in your team or in your organization, but actually in your family life or even in yourself, things are not going very well at all. And this was certainly the case for me for a number of years, because as you know, Tony, and now everyone is, I'm going to be outed. I'm actually, I'm still ordained as a
Millions
priest.
and millions and millions of people are going to know now.
I'm a priest in the Church of England, and a lot of my working life prior to going into leadership consultancy was as a priest. And our last post some years ago was in West London, and it was a large church. It was an absolute joy to lead. We had hundreds of people, multiple congregations in 6 different languages. So it felt like the UN, actually. It was leading a little United Nations, and I loved it, Tony. And we had a cracking
Awesome.
team, brilliant volunteers, and amazing community work going on, absolutely thriving. But here's the thing: my family was suffering.
Okay.
My children were struggling in the local schools, and my wife, who's been very honest about this publicly, was struggling with some mental health issues at the time. And even though the work was brilliant and it was thriving, and we were getting all kinds of accolades from the council and others about what we were doing,
Mhm.
actually my family was going down, and I just wasn't able to give the time to it because I was requiring so much of my time in that job. And actually, what happened in the end is that circle of influence brought down the others, because in the end,
Right.
I realized we could not continue the way we were, and I couldn't quite make the changes. And for us, that meant actually leaving full-time ordained ministry to change careers. Now, it doesn't have to
May I ask
mean
a
that for
quick
somebody.
may I
Yeah.
ask a quick question about that? Because
Yes.
when I mean, when the leaders and the people who are listening um, to this, how do they know when it's gone too far? How do they know when they're out of balance or too far out of balance? How how would one figure that
Yeah.
out?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in your family, usually people are quite vocal about how you're
Right.
doing and what's not
Okay.
working and what is working. And we just need to be attentive to that, I think.
Mm.
Usually, and particularly in the work environment as well, there's usually feedback that if we're, again, intentional to the feedback that's coming back, if we're not performing
Right.
as we should, that should be coming back to us in some form of healthy, sensible communication. And I guess the question is, are we listening, or are we driving on regardless, saying, no, this is my approach, and we don't listen and we continue? And I think I did that with the blinkers on for too long, Tony.
Right.
Um, so, yeah, I think that's the answer. But the point,
What sorry, I
yeah,
was going to say, why? I'm just really interested in this. Why do you feel that people do that? I mean, because
yeah,
I see this a lot in myself. I will just focus in, and I'll go on. What's driving that?
yeah.
What's driving that kind of, oh, I must do this?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think there are multiple reasons for it.
Right.
And ultimately, I think it's us doing the hard work of owning why. So it could be, for
Right.
example, in my case, it was a lot related to my personality.
Okay.
So I'm a pioneer in terms of the 5 voices systems that we've looked at before on COCF, and that
Could,
means
could,
that,
could you could you explain for people who
yeah,
are listening for the first time and don't know the five
yes.
voices? What's the five voices?
Yes. So 5 voices is a way of understanding your own personality
Right.
wiring, and how that relates to others. And in my case, there are 5 different personalities that everybody has a combination of all 5, but usually
Okay.
has a lead personality. And for me, my lead personality is pioneer. Now that sounds
Right.
all very exciting. Oh, he's a pioneer, but
It
actually,
does. Goodness me.
it comes with some challenges, because
Okay.
pioneers are very good at seeing the future and driving for results. And a lot of that, particularly in me at the time, was to do with reputation and to do with achieving certain goals that I felt were linked to success and achievement.
Hmm.
And the reality was there was a lot of me in that,
Right.
and I had to face some of that and go, hang on a minute, as I'm driving for those goals, what's the relational damage that I'm leaving in my wake?
Okay.
And that was a real learning point for me as a leader, and probably one of the reasons why I help leaders think that through now, because I want to save them from some of those tragedies that can come. Fortunately, it wasn't a
'Cause-
tragedy for us, because we changed early enough. So
Well,
thanks, Tony. Yeah, do you want
no,
to ask a question on
yeah,
that?
because I think because one of the things with that is that a lot of the times that sometimes, especially us as leaders and entrepreneurs, failure is a way to success because we're constantly having to deal with problems and issues, and sometimes they don't go right.
Yes.
So I think that even those things don't work out the way we want them. It's how do we learn and how do we adapt? And I think that's one of
Yes.
the key differentiators is you see a problem. The challenge is when you don't see it. So I was really happy you just explained that, because I wanted, sometimes it's trying to figure out, what am I not seeing? Because I'm doing really well and I'm
Yes.
getting all of this stuff, but I'm not seeing that maybe something is a little bit out of balance. And I think that's the tricky bit. I
I
mean, for
think
me
you're right.
anyway.
I agree with that, Tony, 100%. And I think that's why this tool's actually quite helpful,
Yeah.
because what you can do is you can look at this tool and say,
Okay.
okay, let me look at all the circles in which I'm a leader. And here's the
Right.
question: which circle am I the weakest in at the moment?
Interesting. Okay.
And what do I therefore need to do to be more intentional and not just accidental in that circle?
Right.
And
Okay.
that could be with your team, your organization, it could be any of those circles. But what's the one circle that you think, actually, if I don't perform better in that circle, it's going to pull down all the others?
Mm.
And what therefore do I need to do? So that's a good question for
Okay.
those
Interesting.
listening to think about and take away.
Okay. Thank you. So, I mean, one of the things that drives people a lot is maybe the feeling that they're not enough, or imposter syndrome.
Yes.
Is that something that you've done a lot of work on?
Um, I wouldn't say it's something I've done an awful lot of work on, but I would definitely say this is something that I would like to talk about, and
Sure.
something that impacts me and has impacted me throughout my life. So, yes, great question. As you can see, I've put up on the screen another little tool for us to think about related to that question.
So for people who are listening, there's a slide with inhibition and prohibition. So inhibition on the left and prohibition on the right. So on the left, it's limiting beliefs, and on the right, enforced restrictions.
Yes. So there's a difference between inhibition and prohibition. Let me give you an example. So, prohibition, if I said to you, Tony, I've decided to become a professional footballer. And at the age of 50, you might say to me, Stu, listen, mate, I know you're pretty healthy, you're pretty fit, you can kick a ball, but the chances of you becoming a professional footballer at 50, that's an enforced restriction, mate. That's a prohibition. It's not going to happen. But if I said to you, I have an inhibition about going into some very influential positions of businesses and charities and governments around the world, where I get to speak to them about their leadership strategy. And sometimes I don't feel I'm enough. Sometimes I doubt whether I've got the expertise to truly help them. You
Okay.
might say to me, Stu, that sounds more like a limiting belief than it does an enforced restriction. And I would say you're absolutely right. It doesn't stop it from feeling like I'm an imposter and that I don't belong, but it's a limited belief. So let me give you an example of where this can come from in our lives.
Mm.
So in my life, Tony, I grew up in South London, and my father was a butcher. My
Oh,
mum
wonderful.
stayed at home to look after me. I'm a third generation butcher's son, so working
Wow.
class
Okay.
family. One thing I know how to do is carve at Christmas time. Give me that turkey, I can carve it. My dad taught me
Okay.
really well.
Okay.
But it was interesting because I was the first one in my family to go to university, and then I did engineering, and then eventually, I became a priest, and now I have a leadership organization that I'm involved in leading. But the journey was such that when I'm in the room with some of these incredible leaders from around the world, that little nagging thought comes to me: you're just the butcher's son, Stu.
Yeah.
What are you
Oh,
doing here?
interesting. Okay.
What are you
Yeah.
doing here? You're just the butcher's son. And it's in those moments where I have to remember, actually, no, that I have been doing this for some time. I actually do have something to say. I have actually got something that could truly help people. And I wonder if there's a number of people listening to this who go, oh my goodness, yeah, those those limiting beliefs come and attack me in those moments.
Yeah.
And it's in those moments and leading up to those moments, preparing for those moments, that we need to go, hang on a minute, actually, I need to remember the elephant I've become, if you can excuse the phrase, that actually I've grown over the years. I have got something to contribute. And I think having that confidence, having the people around you, and building a track record really helps to overcome some of those inhibitions. And I often say to people that I'm coaching, when they say, well, I couldn't do that. And I often say, well, who says you can't? Why can't you do that? Come on,
Mm.
tell me why. And then when they start to talk to me about it, I go, hang on a minute, that's a limiting belief. That's not a prohibition. You can break through that glass ceiling. In fact, you have in the past, so keep going.
I must admit, when sometimes, I mean, imposter syndrome, I think a lot of people that no, I know, I feel a lot of going, why am I here? You know, why the hell am I doing this thing? And one of the things that I've found is quite nice is when someone just says, hey, it's really nice that you're here. And I think that we
Yes.
can help other people who feel that, even if they look super confident, just go up to them and say, I'm really glad you're here. That was really, and you don't have to be over the top or crazy like that, but you can just go, you know what, that was really good. Or I'm really
Yes.
pleased you're here before they do it. And for me, it goes, oh my goodness, then someone's acknowledged me and my place in whatever organization it is. And it makes me feel so good. So I think we can
Yes.
all do something to help people, can't we?
Yeah, I think you're right, Tony. Encouragement is such a
Yeah.
small but really powerful thing. Just saying thanks for what you said, that really helped me.
Yeah.
Something
Fan-
simple goes a long way.
fan- so we're talking about imposter syndrome. A lot of that is about how we feel we could influence other people or how we deserve it. You talk a little bit about the 4 filters of influence. So what
Yes.
are these? How
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, influence is really what leadership is about, because if we
Hmm.
can't influence anybody, then we can't really lead anybody. And
Right.
and I want to argue that to influence somebody, really you have to have earned their trust in a way. They have to trust you in some sense to follow you or to listen to you. And there are 4 filters we have at Giant that we think are really important to unlocking that trust, which
Right.
enables you to get to either a transaction or, even better than a transaction, to a relationship with somebody.
Okay.
So that there are 4, and these are the 4 that I'd like to share with you. The first one, they all begin with C, so they're quite easy to remember.
That's
Uh,
useful.
it is useful. So I'll run through them quickly and then perhaps a little bit more detail. So first
Okay.
one is character, which is about
Okay.
integrity. Second one is chemistry, which is about whether people like you. The third one is competence, which is your skill set, and credibility, which is about applying that skill set relevantly into somebody's world. Now, these are all hugely important because in order to develop trust to the point where you can work together or do a business deal or have a really well functioning team, you have to unlock all 4 of those filters. So if somebody's very competent, but actually you don't really trust their character, it's going to be quite difficult to work with them.
Mm.
Equally, you may say I totally trust them. They're a person of absolute integrity, but I just don't believe they've got the skill set to really deliver
Yeah.
on this. You can't go forward. So these 4 filters are hugely important. And what I often say is, often people get to leadership positions on competence, but and I often say competence will get you there, but character will keep you there. So let's
Oh,
give an
interesting.
example of this. Just think this through for a minute. I often think
Okay.
in our country, in the UK, we've had a prime minister in recent years called Boris Johnson. And Boris, very clever man, in many ways a very strong leader. But what has come out in our press, and he's going through the challenges at the moment, is that
Yeah.
during COVID, during the pandemic, he lied to the British public about having parties, and it's all come out. And it was a character issue. So
Yeah.
incredibly competent man, making some very good decisions with some good people. That might be arguable, but character-wise, he had a huge hole, and in the end, it killed his leadership. There was no way that he could, with all integrity, continue as the prime minister of our country after lying about it
Mm.
continually. It was a character flaw, and it killed his leadership. And I often think of leadership in this sense. Character, I think, could be the most important one, but all are important. It's a bit like a beautiful cruise ship. I've never been on one of these lovely cruise holidays. I'm looking forward to it when I get older. But relaxing on the deck on a
You
deck
don't
chair.
have to be old to go on cruises. Jesus.
Maybe I've got that image in my head. Maybe that's another inhibition we could talk about. But
Well,
anyway,
yeah, absolutely. We're going to book a cruise line. If anyone's listening who has cruise liners, Stu needs to go on one. Let's
take
readdress that
take me on
value.
a cruise, somebody. I'm
Yeah,
up
he
for it.
wants to
I'm
go
up
on a
for it.
cruise.
But if you can imagine one of these beautiful liners with lots of decks and swimming pools and everything, if it's got, it may look beautiful, but if it's got a small leak in the back, in
Yeah.
the bottom of that boat somewhere, you wouldn't notice initially. You may not notice for hours, maybe even days, but slowly that boat's taking in water, and eventually it's going to sink the ship. And that's what character does. If we don't work on our character, and character, it's going to sink us. Character, how would you define character? I love C.S. Lewis's definition of character. He's one of my favorite authors. He says, character is who you are when no one else is looking.
Oh, goodness me. That's scary.
It's scary.
That's I just a lot of judgment came in on myself there.
And it's hard. It's harsh because we often think about reputation, and don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
reputation is important, but reputation is what others think of you to a level. Character is who you really are, and in the end, who you really are comes out. It may
Yeah.
take some months or years, but in the end, the truth comes out. So
Mm.
that, I would say, working on character is massive for any leader, and particularly for leaders that are in very influential positions, because they're incredibly competent. They've got there through their competency. They've built a track record of credibility. I would say to those leaders, if you're not working on those pieces around integrity, honesty, how you treat people, how you're living your life outside of the boardroom and the workplace, those things eventually will sink you if you don't give due attention to them. Tony, I don't know
How,
if you want to come back with that.
yeah, no, it's interesting. How would you know you're not giving it enough attention? I mean, what are the markers? I mean, you go, oh my goodness, I'm not giving my character enough attention. How would one do that?
Yeah, that's good. I suppose there's a number of ways. I think there's two things come to mind. One is that we all have a conscience anyway, and I think there's a moral conscience in us. So if we know that we are acting perhaps in an unethical way in some way, we usually know that. Even the worst of us know, oh well, I'm my conscience is telling me that, but stuff it, I'm going to carry on. There's an element in which we say, well, hang on a minute, maybe I'll listen to my conscience, because actually that probably isn't morally right. So we all have, I think, a little inbuilt moral compass.
Okay.
We all know that to trip up an old lady on the bus is wrong, whoever we are. That's just wrong. So there's something about that. I think there's also something that we gain from others. So if others have pointed something out to us, and that's interesting, because not all of us build around us those vulnerable relationships where we'll truly listen to what others say about us. So, being able to build a collaborative work environment or home environment where we can honestly take feedback and not get upset about it, but receive it and say, thank you. That's hard for me to hear, but thank you. I'm going to take that away and think about it, rather than losing it and going, how dare you say that about me? That I think can be an incredible way in which we grow and work on it.
So we've got to make sure that we surround ourselves with the right sort of people, because otherwise, if we get bad feedback, then suddenly we've got the situation where we're being influenced by the wrong people. So in a
Yes.
way, what you're saying is we become the people we spend time with.
In a way, that's true, and I'd like to just hit you with a couple of questions that relate to
Go
this,
for it.
because what I think we need to do is we need to create an environment around us where we're willing to lower our walls of self-preservation.
Okay.
This kind of links into the Brené Brown vulnerability stuff that many people will have come across, and what it's saying is this: really, I think there are three questions that we can ask of ourselves. They're deep questions, but they really help us to grow in these areas and allow these walls of self-preservation to come down, so that we actually build really healthy relationships that increases our influence. So here are the three. The first one is, what am I afraid of losing in this relationship?
Okay.
What am I trying to hide? And lastly, what am I trying to prove, and to whom? Let me unpack that a little bit,
Mm.
because they're
Yeah, please.
deep questions. So let's put it this way: in my role as an executive coach and a leadership consultant, I'm often called in to work with a CEO or a senior team, and I'll be with them for a few weeks, and I'll start to realize what the issues are. Now, the thing is, the CEO is usually paying me quite handsomely to sort the issues out, but sometimes, and quite often, the issue is related to them.
No problems with
Yes.
the CEO, Stu.
can you
Honestly, oh,
can you
I'm
believe it?
shocked and
Absolute
appalled.
shocker. And
That
then
might be the case. I've never known any CEOs who've ever had problems like that, ever.
and then Tony, then I've got this dilemma, because I'm like, this chap or this lady is
Mhm.
paying me, and I'm about to tell them some really uncomfortable truths about them, where they may go, well, Stu, thanks very much, but see you later. I
Yeah.
don't want to hear that. Goodbye.
Yep.
Okay. Or I go, well, hang on a minute. Who else is actually ever telling them this?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
and, and actually, I'm just going to have to be honest. I'm gonna tell you what I honestly believe to be the problem. I have to before I do that, I have to answer the question: what am I afraid of losing? So here,
Right.
I may lose my client. They may go,
Mm.
Stu, you've gone too far. I don't want to hear
Mm.
that. They'll know it's true, but they're not prepared to work on it, or they're like, well, we're going to do other things to solve the problem. We're not actually going to hit the root. But so I have to kind of do that. Now, when I have done that on occasion, well, not occasion, if it happens, I choose to do
Every
it, right?
Yeah,
When
absolutely.
when
Yeah.
I've done that, there hasn't been a huge number of times when it's been really difficult, but that I have done it. What I've found is an amazing result. I found that honesty has been received really well, and the
Mm.
person has gone, yeah, I think you're right. Thank you for telling me that. I don't know what to do about it, but it's true. And then what I found is that over the next few weeks, we've gone past transaction, and we're now in relationship. And now we're in a really honest
Right.
relationship where we're working on the real issue.
I mean, one question I'd like to ask is when leaders get that, or when and our listeners would get that feedback, which seems like a problem. There's an issue. There's something. Someone has told me that something I'm doing is not 100% right.
Yeah.
How do you find the best, or how could we then turn that into a learning opportunity? So we've got the feedback. We've gone,
Yeah.
okay. How can we learn from that? What are the tools that
Yeah.
one would use to just go, right? How do I just not be insulted or push back? How can I then go, okay, no, I'm going to lean into this and use it as an opportunity to grow?
Yeah. That is such an awesome question, Tony. I have to say, because most people can get stuck, or actually most people's probably phrase, a lot of people can get stuck in the this
Yeah.
is a problem. And what we're trying to say is, why don't you flip that and say, rather than seeing a problem, why don't we see here a learning opportunity?
Okay.
And I like to use something called CORE to help them through it. CORE. It's a kind of a
Got it.
methodology of working through a learning opportunity, turning a
Okay.
problem into a learning opportunity. So the first thing to do, if you take it as an acronym, the C stands for call it. So
Yeah.
what we're going to do is we're going to call it, what's the learning opportunity here? Now, let's think about it. I had one recently, which I'll give you an example of, a senior team where they could, every time they met together, the meeting was really dysfunctional. And
Right.
some one or two people would dominate, about three or four really good people would stay quiet, and
Hmm.
it just wasn't achieving what they needed to do. They weren't collaborating well. And they called it, they said, look, we are not doing our meetings well.
Right.
We want to get better at how we meet together. Right. That was
Okay.
that was a simple thing. Call it. I say simple. It actually required quite a lot. Now, the
Yeah.
next piece down is to go, well, hang on a minute. Why? Why is it like that? And
Mm.
that's the O for own it. So when you go to core, CORE, we've called it for C. Now we're going
Yeah.
to own it for O. What what do we have to own here about why this is an issue that we need
Okay.
to get right? Now,
Mm.
I often say to people, that's the real nub, because that's the bit that you can't rush. You've got to spend time. You've got to go into the rabbit hole. You've got to go deep here on own it. What is it in me that perhaps is causing this issue? what is it about us that means that this isn't working right? And that's where you do a bit of that unpacking of the deep stuff. Once you've done that, you then need to
Okay.
move to which is the R, which is respond. How are we going to resolve this?
Right.
What's our
Okay.
practical step? And that's a sort of a strategy. It's a game plan. You're putting together the game plan of how we're going to resolve this. But my point is, it's very easy for people to go straight to game plan when they have a problem.
Oh goodness, yeah. Oh, we're gonna do this. We're gonna do that. No, let's figure out why this happened first. No, I've
Yeah.
seen it so many. I've done it myself. Oh, can we just fix that? And
Yes.
I think this also happens a lot to me in relationships. You go straight to fix rather than
Yes.
figuring out what it is.
What
Yeah,
exactly? That's 100%. So
it's such a great
before
tool.
you get to respond, you've got to own it. Then you
Yeah.
can respond. Then you can execute, which is the when. Which is okay. So
Okay.
we've got a strategy, we've got a game plan, but let's put timescales to it so that we
Mm,
can actually do it sensibly. So what
okay.
I would say is with what's so powerful about core when it comes to a problem is it's turning into a learning opportunity, and it's saying what, that's the call it, why,
Yeah.
that's the own it, how, that's the respond, and when, that's the execute. And that usually, I can do that with a team or I can do it with an individual. You need at least an hour, sometimes 90
Yeah.
minutes, depending on the complexity of the opportunity, and work that through. And sometimes we've spent nearly an hour on own it. But stuff comes up, and then people go, "Oh, that's why we do this. Oh gosh, no wonder." And then you can address it really effectively and accurately.
How do you get that first part? Because I know once you're into a method like this, go, oh, this is a core, I can use that. How do you
Yeah,
get to the point where you go, I need to call it, or when is it big enough? Because there's so many different things that are going on. Where do
yeah,
I call it? I'll be coring all day. I mean, how do you how do you
yeah.
know which one
No,
to pick?
you are so right, Tony. Exactly. So I think you have got to be really selective here.
Okay,
You've got to say, what is probably the biggest problem that we have that we want to turn into a
okay,
learning opportunity? So it's
got it.
what's our biggest business challenge right now? And let's work that one. So what I often do is if I'm working with a business or an organization over the course of a year, I might say, let's do 3 in the year.
Right.
That's
Okay.
not a lot, but actually solving 3 major business problems in a year, fantastic if we could achieve that, right?
So you can look back and go, what am I? Where do I feel most uncomfortable, or where do I see where the problem maybe some of my team are diminished because of an issue, and you address that. Okay, I get that now. Yeah, I can
That's
see.
it. And again, it's being intentional. It doesn't mean that we've immediately got the solution, but we're
Yeah,
trying to find out why, and then we're working the problem. And what I love here is that when you're doing it in a team setting, everybody brings their superpowers to play because we're not saying you're the problem. We're saying this is a learning opportunity, and we're all bringing our skill set to bear to solve that and come up with a great solution.
so,
So
yeah.
it's really great to see teams working like that together.
Oh, I'd love to see that. One of the things that just as you were talking, I was going, there are so many things, and I know I'm just there are so many tools that you have. One of the things that I see a lot is where people at all levels of organizations get burnout, and
Yes.
they're going, oh, I need to do
Yeah.
this and I need to do that and I need to get that, and they're
Yes.
dividing their day. Our gym, and then our morning section, afternoon section. I do
Yes.
things in like 25-minute segments, and I'm constantly working because with the cost of living prices, and there's a challenge right now with funding. We've all got to work harder. We're trying to work harder, we're forcing it.
Yes.
How do we learn to rest? I mean, when is it right to rest? Because people go, oh, no, you need work life balance. You go, if I had a work life balance, I would be on the street. And you go, and oh, you feel it. You feel you'll be on the street. So how
Yes.
do you get that rhythm?
Yeah.
How do we help with that?
Yeah, and it's a great question, Tony, and I think it's massive for all of us, particularly in
Yeah.
our digital age where we're always switched on. Our phones are barely off. We've probably got a number of digital platforms, especially you, Tony, as a connector. You've probably got multiple messages coming in on multiple platforms, and
Yeah.
do we ever switch off? So I think it is a massively important point. Um, what I think we want here is we have to work out what the goal is. I tend to not use the word work-life balance, because I feel that it's almost impossible to operate like that. I kind of say, how do we live an integrated life, and how do we
Interesting.
blend
Yeah.
well the different aspects of our life to remain healthy? So that what I think we're going for, we have to kind of be clear here. We want I want people to be, and I hope we would agree with this, that we want people to be present with their loved ones, so that they're
Yeah.
not just always working, but equally really productive in their working life. So we want to be productive, but we don't want to burn out. But we want to
Yeah.
be present with the people that are most important to us in our life, but not neglect our responsibilities. And
Absolutely.
one, I mean, there's probably lots of ways of doing this, but one tool that we found particularly helpful is something called the 5 gears.
Okay.
5 gears is a bit like it is a manual or shift stick if you're in America, not your automatic car gearbox, but imagine a manual with first, second, third, fourth, fifth gears and a reverse. And what we say is that it's really helpful sometimes to think of life in terms of gears. So let me quickly run through them, and then Tony, you could pull, like, we could pull out a question or two on this. Firstly, fifth gear is focus mode. This is when you are focused on a task, your head down, and you're getting on with it. It might be you're preparing for a big meeting. It might be you're writing a speech. Whatever it is, it might be a bit of strategy time. That's gear
And,
5.
and I'd love to talk about that, because I think that's one of the hardest states for people to get into now. But we don't have time for it now. But I'd love,
Yes.
if you were to come back, I'd love to talk about how you get and keep focus.
I'd love to. And
Yeah.
let's come back to that. So we will.
Cool.
Gear 4 is task mode, which is really the reason we don't get into 5 very often, which is where we're in multitasking mode and we're always dealing with things. That might be emails, it might be a phone call coming in, might be a meeting we're going into. Even what we're doing now would be classed as gear 4. We're doing things together. We're talking about things together. That's gear 4. Most of us wake up in gear 4 and we spend all our life in gear 4, and it's not healthy. And we'll come to that in a moment. Gear
Okay.
three, gear three. Yeah, sorry, Tony. Don't worry,
That's
there's
all
some
right.
solutions.
I feel slightly judged now. I'm not sure how to take that.
Tony, I'm the same. There's no judgment
My
here
car,
at all.
my car, when I started out, only had 4 gears. I'm screwed. Okay.
Third gear,
Yeah.
social mode, and
Okay.
this was what was really killed off during the pandemic, because we weren't able to
Ah.
socialize like we would like to. And this is when you're just hanging out with friends, having a drink. Could be drinks after work. It might be having a coffee with somebody or a group of friends. And this is hugely important. And to take it back to influence for a moment, we're actually more influential in gear 3 than in any other gear.
Ah.
In a
Interesting.
social context, as a
Yeah.
leader, you have the highest level of influence. We can come back to that. It could be on
Would
the
you
golf.
just very
Yeah.
quickly? Would you call that networking or professional networking? Would you say gear 3 or the social mode?
Networking, yes, I would say networking
Yeah.
is a consequence of it. It's actually, you're getting together just for something social to hang out. But you're
Yeah.
right, it becomes a networking event. So it could be playing golf with some people. You'd be
Right.
amazed how many deals. Well, you probably wouldn't, because you're aware how many
I don't
deals.
play golf.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm a terrible golfer, but it might be, just having a meal and a chat. It's often in those social moments where some of the most important conversations come out, and people
Interesting.
decide in that moment, I'm going to trust you. I want to move forward with you. So that gear 3 is hugely important, and it's very hard for introverts, because introverts struggle usually with social mode. They're much more comfortable in gear 5 and in some of the other gears.
Right.
So it's learning how to be healthy in all the gears. The second gear is called connect mode, and that's really when we're going deep with somebody. That might be a loved one, somebody we care deeply about. It might be a friendship, but it's not work related. There's no actual business work going on here. It could be a partner
Okay.
going out for meal, for a date night or something. And then you've got first gear, which is recharge mode, which
Hmm.
is when you are unplugging from it all. You're doing
Okay.
something that truly is restorative for you, recharges you, gives you rest, and energizes you. And the last one is reverse. And reverse is response mode, which is saying, actually, sometimes I need to reverse back and say, hey, I got it wrong. I'm really sorry. I made a mistake.
Mm.
And many of us think that we might undermine our influence by
Mm.
by admitting an error, but
No.
actually, the stats go the other way. That we actually, that people respect us more by owning up and saying, "I got it wrong. I'm really sorry." Um,
And I love that you say it that way, because I always see that reversal when you have to reverse and say, look, I'm sorry. I actually see that it's a lot more beneficial for you as well,
yeah,
because it helps you self-reflect and reset. And I think having that, or having people point that out to you, and having the people who love or care for you enough to be able to say, hey, you know what, that wasn't right, or why did
yes,
you do that, in the right way that you can hear it. Because if
yes,
it comes in a way that is confrontational, you just put up the barriers. And I
yes,
think it takes a lot of skill to be able to get through, and I'd love to talk about that in a future one as well.
yes,
How would you get into that form of space where someone can actually hear you without it just impacting on the surface?
yes. And we absolutely, Tony. We could talk about that on another occasion.
Mm,
But I think there's a difference between a resistant leader and a secure leader,
yeah.
and we've got to all grow to be more secure, and
Mm.
that's easily said, but quite challenging to do.
We'll just do that. We'll just diarise that for the afternoon, shall we, Stu?
Yeah, not that off in half an hour.
Okay.
Now, to come back to your point about burnout, because it's hugely important,
Yeah.
is with the 5 gears here. The mantra is every gear every day, apart from on your day off. Some of you might call that a Sabbath, whatever, however you want to do it,
Mm.
whatever your background is. So it when I'm off. So for me, Saturday's a complete day off, and that would mean that I wouldn't do any gear 4 or gear 5.
Ah,
I
okay.
would do gear 3. I'm socializing with
Mhm.
friends, hanging out. Gear 2, I might be having some deep one-to-ones with my wife or my
Mm.
children, and I'd make sure I'm getting some gear 1 in. But here's the thing: gear 1 can happen every day. So if we're learning the rhythm of rest and recharge, and we're putting that into every day, even into our busiest days, we will have more resources. We're less likely to burn out because we're doing something that's restorative to us every day. So let me give you some examples. So I try and say to people, think about your whole year and
Okay.
break it down into daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, and say
Okay. I'm there.
what's going to be my first gear recharge strategy for the year. Okay, so
Midday naps.
midday,
Midday naps
there
for
you
my
go. Okay,
recharge. I
so
love them.
when it's possible, and by
Okay.
the way, sleep and power naps are definitely in first gear. This is so important.
Oh, I need my nap. Don't have a meeting with me midday because I'm on the sofa having a quick nap.
Well, you're in good company, Tony, because the NASA astronauts have
Oh,
been
really?
told they need 24-minute nap. Apparently, is the optimum midday,
Oh, wow.
and it
Okay.
does truly restore and recharge you.
So if
But
NASA's listening, I'm up on that one. I may not pass the others, but call me, okay? Call
you
me.
can become an astronaut. Um,
I'd love to. God, I've always
so,
wanted to become an astronaut.
so
Okay,
it's
carry on.
finding those moments each day. So for me, I get up quite early, and I live. I'm quite fortunate to live near the river here on the River Thames, and I
Oh,
get my
lovely.
golden retriever and I go for a lovely walk in the morning. For me, it's a time to pray. It's a time to just enjoy nature,
Mm,
and I get back early. And I try not to have my phone on unless I'm listening to a podcast or something. I
okay.
try not to do it, and I get back, have my coffee, and at that point, I'm in to the day, and I'm going. But on an average day, if I'm not catching a flight or rushing to an early meeting in London or something, that's brilliant. If I've missed that, I need to fit something like that in later on in the day if I possibly can.
That's
And
useful. Okay, I
that could
like
be
that.
reading, it could be the gym, it could be a nice walk. But I would say fight for that. And we have to fight for it,
Mm,
Tony, because everything else is clamoring our attention. The phone never stops, the messages are coming in, and the temptation, again, it comes back to accidental and intentional. If we're accidental, we'll just dive into everything. But I
yeah,
think
Slack, chat, and WhatsApp are now the new phone calls. My phone hardly ever rings, but yeah, Slack pings all the time.
Same for me. So for me, I've worked out it means I suffer with a little bit less sleep, but maybe I'll start having the power naps at lunch. But I get those mornings, I get that early morning, and that really recharges me. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready.
Love it.
And I don't get it right all the time. I'm here to share all my mistakes. But the reason this helps me is that I got this wrong. And as I shared
Ah,
at the beginning of this call, I
okay.
used to come in from work to be with the family, but I would still really be in gear 4.
Mm,
And I
yep.
remember my
Guilty.
little daughter at the time, she was about 7. I taught her this. We taught the 5 gears to our family because we thought this would be useful. And I came in one day and she went, Dad, you're stuck in gear 4. We're all in gear 2. And I was like, oh no.
Oh, I love it.
It really got me right in the heart. So I think there is something here. I think there are practical things we can do, but we have to be
Yep.
intentional. And I think working out what is a healthy rhythm of rest for you
Mm,
and sticking to it, fighting hard to guard it. We have to guard it and do it because it will enable you to go the distance in leadership. That's the difference.
yeah.
It's about pace. And
This
yeah,
this makes a lot more sense to me than just saying work-life balance.
yeah,
Actually breaking it down into to different sections, and then I can explore those.
yes,
Stu, I've utterly loved talking with you. There are just so many tools, and I can see there's 1,000 more put tools in your kind of in your tool bag, as it were. But for people listening, what if you had to break it down to just say, look, if you only did one thing
yes.
after listening to me today, what would it be? No
Yeah,
pressure.
that's such a good question. And I think what I'd say is let's go back to what we talked about right at the beginning, Tony, where we
Okay.
looked at the 5 circles of influence, and we said we talked about performing and underperforming. But I
Right.
think the heart of it, at the heart of this of getting things right as a leader, is is about self and how you're looking after yourself. I often remember when I get on a plane, you know, they give you none of us really listen anymore to the safety features, but they say if the oxygen goes in the cabin, the
Yeah.
oxygen mask will come down, and they say to you, put your oxygen mask on first so that you can help someone else once you know
Yeah.
your child. And that's very counterintuitive if you're a parent, by the way, because you're
Mm.
thinking, well, I want to get my kids sorted first, then I'll sort me, because that's how we operate, put our children
Yeah.
first. But actually they say no, you've got to get yours on, then you can truly help everybody. And I think that's the message I'd want to say today. I'd want to say, look, get intentional about being healthy yourself as a leader. Get the help you need. If that might mean growing in a bit more self-awareness. It might mean getting a first gear recharge strategy in your life. It's working out what you need. It could relate to something spiritual for you. It certainly does for me. But find
Okay.
what it is and get that right, because all the other circles in which you are going to influence and lead, whether it's your organization, your family, your team, your community, will be impacted by how healthy you are and how you're living your life. Because in the end, remember that little hole in the bottom of the boat, it takes in water and eventually the whole boat sinks. So work on that.
I can't think of a final or better way to end this, Stu. That's brilliant. I've already got a whole bunch of things, and I'm already thinking about the gears and everything like that. So look, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, Tony. I've loved being with you. Thanks again.